There you go.
I got Mr. Lopez lined up if you want to do
Did you get
Testing 1, 2, 3.
email that I sent you yesterday evening?
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to our business meeting of Wednesday, June 26, 2019. It is now 9 a.m. Reminder, there will be no public comment at this meeting, but we will be having a public meeting at 6 o'clock with the city manager this evening. I will now call this meeting to order. Madam Clerk, would you please call roll?
Honorable Sandra Whitehead.
Here.
Honorable Kathy Clark.
Here.
Honorable Ralph Heschler.
Present.
Honorable Paul Baca.
Here.
Honorable George Sacchetti.
Here.
Madam Mayor, we have a quorum.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda this morning is silent meditation. Please join me in 15 seconds of silent meditation. Thank you. Next item on our agenda is the pledge. Commissioner Baca, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda this morning is the approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda as submitted, or are there any changes?
Mayor Whitehead, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the agenda for June 26, 2019 as submitted.
Thank you. Do I hear a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda for June submitted. Are there any questions, comments, concerns? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. The next item on our agenda this morning is item C, presentation. C1, presentation, discussion, update, infrastructure capital outlay improvement plan, ICIP plan. Tracy Burnett, our grant projects coordinator and designated zoning official. Good morning.
Good morning, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, Commissioners. So this year I'm going to be breaking up the ICIP into 4 separate meetings. Our first meeting was held on June 12th. We did a public hearing at 6 p.m. here in the Commission chambers. Today I'm just going to do the presentation that'll include a brief explanation of what the ICIP is, and then the list of priority needs within our infrastructure departments. Another public hearing will be held on July 10th during our regularly scheduled commission meeting, and we'll take public comment or public input again at that time. And then the final adoption of our ICIP will be done at the August 28th commission meeting. So what is the ICIP? You guys, most of you have all been through this annually. So it establishes our priorities over a 5-year period. It's revised annually. And the ICIP is a planning document and not a funding application. Most funding applications require the project to be listed on our ICIP. Infrastructure is not just water, wastewater, solid waste, and electric services, but commodities and services that enable, sustain, or enhance living conditions, like our public buildings, parks, recreations, etc. Last year, we cleaned up and eliminated a lot of projects that were listed on our ICIP because they had either received funding and had been completed, or they no longer met the requirements of an ICIP. They weren't shovel-ready, they weren't necessarily our priority anymore. This year, each of our departments have identified priority projects, some of which include estimated costs. We're still working on some of those. By the final meeting, we should have a prioritized list of projects to recommend to the Commission, taking into consideration our public input and Commission direction as well. So all of our projects listed must identify other available funding sources. The appropriations, if and when we receive them, rarely fund an entire project or fund the entire need. Once again, ICIP is not a funding application or a guarantee for funding. Up here listed are some various funding sources that we've been lucky enough to receive funding from. This year, we have some new DOT applications that are being processed, as well as applications within BOR. I'm continually searching for funds that have minimal cash match, but also at the same time offer enough grant money to fund the majority of a project, because a small cash match does us no good if the grant fund is so small it doesn't cover the entire project. So here's a list of some of our projects that we have previously listed on the ICIP that have received funding and have been completed. Our animal shelter and the rodeo arena improvements, that's a really good example of regionalization. Regionalization is always a top priority when you're funding applications. Our wastewater treatment plant's a good example of a very large project, a little over $9 million that we've been funded for, that we've been phased out over a period of 5 years now. The fuel farm, that's an example of a really good project that enabled us to get some untapped revenues for that department. And then, of course, our veterans wall is an example of, just because it's not on the top 5, they don't necessarily always fund what's in your top 5. You know, they might pick something down our list. And then sidewalk, that was a good example of how we used grant money to stretch that dollar and have our streets department do it in kind. So this is a list of the projects that we already have funding for and that will be completed this coming fiscal year, and some that are in process. So wastewater phase 2B, that's going to be going into construction here shortly. We have our drinking water state revolving loan fund with that water line replacement. Our municipal water PER. Ralph Edwards Park has received monies not only for their trash receptacles that they've been placing throughout the different parks, but as well for the irrigation through Clean and Beautiful, or partial for the irrigation. Then, of course, we always have the LGRF projects. We're lucky enough to get funding pretty regular on those. And then we have some local projects that are going on. OJ's always doing ball field improvements out of his local funding. Solid Waste has been doing the new dumpsters, and they have a new trash truck. And electric department's got their meter replacement coming up. So we're actively in the process of an application with USDA for our Cook Street water treatment and downtown water lines. We have an application in process for vacuum station. And then once our water PER is done, we are also working already on a USDA application for a large water distribution line replacement. And then we have some pending applications for street improvements. So I think everyone will agree that our water line is probably our #1 priority within the city. Our water lines are old and they're past the point of being maintained. Most of our water lines are beyond acceptable as determined by the AMP report, and that report is required for most funding applications, and it's required to be updated regularly. Our water service improvements will benefit both customer service issues as well as our water revenue issues. Funding does require preliminary engineering reports with projected costs and a plan that we have been awarded, as you saw on the last slide, through Colonias, and we're hoping to have a PER completed by December at the latest. And the next slide is just a breakdown on the Drinking Water State Revolving Loan Fund project. Again, that's a $1.2 million project. We were awarded the funding and granted out $600,000 of that, so we'll only have a little over $600,000 on the loan. The Cook Street improvements in our downtown water lines, we are working on that application, finalizing some financial numbers as well as consumption and customer counts, and getting that submitted into USDA. That's going to be a well over a $9 million project. And then our water PER, as stated before. So probably our second priority that we've heard from the public is going to be our streets and roadway improvements. Unfortunately, this department doesn't produce revenue, therefore a lot of their improvements have to rely on local funds and the minimal grant fundings that we're able to receive. We can't list every street on the ICIP as much as we'd like to, so we're going to have to prioritize some of those streets. And some things to consider are ones that service large population. something that might be attached to another project that would be a great money saver, like our Drinking Water State Revolving Loan Fund. We know we're going to be paying engineering services to engineer the water lines, and they can work the roadway improvements into that funding as well. And so that would save considerable amount of money there. Other things to consider are allocating some funds to preserve those streets that we've already had improvements on. Sometimes we get focused on the ones that need it, and then they don't have the funding to move forward with maintaining the ones we've already taken care of. Here's some funded to date or applications in process for roadway. We have the LGRF for 10 to the bottom of the hill that'll be completed this fiscal year, or this next fiscal year. And then our East 8th from Coleman to Tingley, another LGRF project. We do have 2 applications that we have out there right now. One of them is for the Drinking Water State Revolving Loan Fund streets, and the other one would be the hospital loop. So for the next part of the presentation, you're going to see various department needs. I've really consolidated those, so within the PowerPoint packets, I gave you each department's individual list. Hopefully they're in order of the PowerPoint that you can refer to. Not all of their lists or their wants are going to meet the requirements to make the ICIP list, but they're priority needs for each department, and some are being considered maybe for some various other funding options. All the department heads are here today. I think we're only missing one so far, but they're here today if you have any questions at the end of the presentation. So as previously mentioned, water infrastructure is at the top of the list. Improvements are needed not just to the distribution lines, but in the production as well. Even though we've received over $9 million in funding for the wastewater treatment plant improvements, there's still an expensive list of improvements needed. I think you'll see not only on the PowerPoint presentation, but Jesse did a great job breaking down the individual needs for his department, and both of those are well over $130 million for estimated costs. So in the past, on our streets department, streets funding's been applied for various areas, but it leaves some areas incomplete. We never get enough money to fund an entire project. So we need to formulate some type of a plan that's going to preserve the recently funded streets and address improvements in a consistent manner instead of kind of hopping various roads and leaving incomplete sections. I think streets priority would be to complete connecting projects and then preserve the ones that he's already received funding for. And of course, this is just a small list up there of some of the streets that need repair, but there's some that are on streets department's priority list. In our electric department, electric infrastructure is one of the hardest ones to find grant funding for. Most improvements are funded by his own department, so a lot of times we don't hear about all the improvements that he's doing because he just does them. I imagine he's got probably a pretty big list of projects that have happened that we probably aren't aware of, that he's replacing poles or lines on a regular basis. Solid waste and recycling, another department that's difficult to find funding for. They have to fund a lot of their improvements as well within his own budget. This list is comprised of some items that will generate a substantial cost savings for his department as well as future revenue. As his customer base and his traffic flow have definitely increased since the opening of the collection center, the paving around that facility and the recycle yards kind of become a priority for safety concerns. He has extremely old trucks, as you guys know, still in service, so he needs to try and get those out of service and bring in some new ones because maintaining those trucks becomes costly and time consuming. The wood hog chipper obviously would save a large amount of construction debris as well as yard waste going that we're paying to dispose of, and maybe in the future, depending on the demand, could offer a revenue source for selling those chips. And then a roll-off truck system. A lot of calls, I get a lot of calls in my office in P&Z for wanting to know if we rent out any type of a dumpster, something a little smaller than what New Mexico Waste has. Maybe people are doing a large cleanup, maybe they're moving, and so a roll-off system with a roll-off truck that he could actually rent out to customers would be a great revenue source. So our police department is in need of some facility improvements, a record management system, and an evidence tracking system. We have been working on replacing the outdated police vehicles, and we've been lucky enough to receive over the last couple of years USDA funding, supplying the PD with a total of 8 vehicles. However, they use their vehicles a lot, and they need to have a really good fleet replacement plan. So we will continue to apply to USDA. Something to consider, though, is when we throw one of those applications out, they do compete with our other departments. So I kind of have to alternate a little bit so our other departments as well can get some equipment. If anyone visited the animal shelter, I think that they're doing a really good job with the small facility that they have. We received a lot of appropriations, and we regionalized that with the county to put that animal shelter in place, but obviously the funding was not enough to build as big of a shelter as what we need. So they do need to look at some type of an expansion, as well as an addition to a dog park area so they can exercise and socialize the dogs. So Parks and Rec Department, the next couple of slides that you're going to see here are new to the ICIP presentation. In the past, we've really focused on the basic infrastructure, but these departments coming up are no less important. They provide healthy, sustainable, and enriching environments and help establish us as a community. Therefore, they do qualify to be on the ICIP. OJ spent a lot of time assessing the needs of all the parks and recreation areas as opposed to just maintaining what we have. He's trying to do some considerable improvements to all of them, which is definitely noticed. So with that comes a very lengthy list. I'll let you guys review it over. I won't necessarily go all over it, but we do have the Ralph Edwards master plan in place. We do know that that needs irrigation. We were lucky enough to receive $51,000 towards the irrigation, but there again, that's one of those projects. It's 100%, no, it's not 100% grant. We have a 25% cash match on that. Unfortunately, you're looking at the irrigation costs of $100,000 to $125,000. So the $51,000 sounds great until you look at the overall project costs. So our swimming pool as well, a lot like the parks, it provides a healthy, sustainable, and enriching environment. It's used by people of all ages and plays an important and vital role to many people's health and lifestyle. Grant funding is also very difficult to find for a swimming pool unless you're looking at building a very large one, and then there again, the funding that you receive does not match the overall cost of the project. So we would have to have a considerable amount of funding to go with any type of grant. By placing it on the ICIP, we might have a better chance of receiving a larger amount of funding for improvements than we would if we were trying to go out and build a new swimming pool. So our facility department, they're also new to our ICIB, but once again, they're no less important. Our facility department keeps our public buildings accessible to the public, as well as providing a safe working environment. Many of our buildings are costing more money to maintain and repair, and probably would be served better with some new equipment. So Dave took the time to really do a list of some of the things that are needed with our buildings, most all of which, if not all, are open to the public. So it's not just meeting and employees' needs, but it's also providing a better area for our public. So the last one, SJOA. This year we're going to be adding the priority needs of SJOA to our ICIP. Senior citizen facilities do submit their own ICIP list. However, this year they are requesting, PFA is requesting, that the communities being served show their support by placing SJOA items on their ICIP as well. We don't necessarily have to, if they have a project as number one, we don't have to have that project as number one. We just need to show that we are supporting our facility. Mr. Madrid and I toured the SJOA in quite a lengthy tour with the current director, and they're working on a list of improvements needed to the building and to the equipment to better service our seniors. So at this time, I just want to take a quick moment and thank each one of our department heads that submitted an ICIP, because I kind of hounded them to get something good in a list, and they really took a lot of time with it and reviewed their departments. I think that the lists show that our guys obviously take pride in their departments, and they do what they can with the limited funding that they do have. I think people see things that are wrong or failing a lot, but forget to notice that more often than not, on any given day, your lights are going to work, your toilet flushes, your water's running, your trash has been picked up, you enjoyed a walk in the park, you heard the laughter of the kids at the pool, you watched a ball game in the field, you drove on the road to the store, and probably heard police sirens at some point respond as they call. So let's not forget what they do on a daily basis. So at this time, we'll all stand for any questions that you guys may have, and they're all here to answer questions on their individual lists.
Thank you, Tracy. Good job. Manager Madrid.
Mayor, Commissioners, everyone, on the agenda item, I really should have asked that the word discussion be bolded on this item, because that's really, really what we want. The ICIP it's a plan, it's an intent, a statement of intent. It's not a hard and fast plan that we have to stick to. It's more of a declaration of what we need and what the priorities are over the next few years. It's not this year, but it forces us to take a look at every aspect of it. And this really needs to be a community plan. That's why we have public hearings. I think in my experience, I've seen where these plans, they need to be balanced. And we're going to have what's popular, what's affordable, what's politically correct, what's absolutely needed, and we have to balance all of those things. I'll give you a hypothetical example. Renee Canton Street keeps getting washed out by the rain, and people complain about it every year. And every year we go and we fix Renee Canton Street because everybody's upset. Well, every time I talk to Benny about Renee Canton Street now, he tells me, why don't we address the drainage upstream so it doesn't get washed out anymore? Well, that's not popular. You don't see that. That may be underground. So I think the reason that your department heads are here are to answer any question that you have, of course. But their perspective is the practical one. They're the experts that see the actual situations in our community every day. And they know why we have the issues that we have. They know how we should address them, not just on the top layer, but all the way through. And the perspective that you get with their recommendations is the most important. The perspective that we get from our citizens, of course, is a very high priority too. Somewhere in all of this, we need to find the common sense and determine what's most important, whether it's the most popular, whether it's the most affordable, whether it's the most politically correct. So what I think our goal should be is to have the biggest and broadest discussion among everybody, all the interested parties, because we're the ones that are going to make the decisions. And if we can explain how we came to those decisions, I think that the public can't ask for any more than that. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the commission?
You know, I made an observation, just looking at the timeline, in fact, Tracy, very helpful. Just looking here, so we would have the public hearing on July 10, which would be here at the commission chambers.
Correct.
And then the adoption would be August 28th.
Correct.
By the commission, and then the submission day is September 6th. That's our deadline to submit this then? Is that what the September 6th?
Yeah, so after we have the public hearing and public input, and we have the direction from the commission, the entries will start being made into what projects, And so by the time we come to the adoption of it, we already have the ranking, everything's already been entered in, and we're just doing the resolution to adopt, which is the final paper that has to be included with the submission on September 6th.
Okay, well, the reason I was asking, I see there's basically a gap of 3 meetings between the public hearing of July 10, and then we have the adoption on August 28.
Right.
Is that on purpose? I didn't-
Yeah, that gives me lots of time to get all the entries in.
Okay, very.
There's a lot of information to enter
Okay.
in.
Okay, just want to see how that's playing out. Okay,
Okay.
good.
Just as a side note, one thing that is important in our final ICIP plan is our top 5 priorities. Those are the ones that the commission should consider the most. The other ones are all important too, and most of these projects are important enough to be on the ICIP, but the top 5 are the ones that the legislature and the funding entities look at the most.
Okay. Commissioner Heschler.
Thank you. This question is for Manager Madrid or Tracy Burnett, whoever wants to tackle it. It's not that complicated, but I just have a question. Do departments compete for the same funding? And if they do compete for the same funding, how do you derive the priorities and what's the process there?
Okay, it depends on the funding. If it's general funding, or if it's financing, like we're gonna look at a little bit later on in our agenda, yes, they will compete. Generally, for the enterprise funds, our utilities, we're able to fund from their own resources, whether it's through financing or tapping into the reserves. The general fund are the ones that will compete.
How about the grant funding itself, like USDA or the other grant funding?
Generally, no. The grant funding is generally by purpose. So the water and wastewater, even though they're part of the same department, they won't compete for funding because water is one funding source and wastewater is another. I think the most critical balance that we have to have in the next few years for ourselves is I think we're going to have all kinds of funding coming in for water and wastewater, thanks to Tracy and Jesse and all the good work that they do. But we're going to tear up all the streets, and we don't have a lot of funding for streets. So I think that's where we need to balance is let's be able to do it right and do it once. So the general fund, the generally funded departments like the street department, we need to find other sources, the capital outlay or financing or LGRF, DOT, Federal Highway Administration. They don't necessarily compete, but that's one example where the street department may have a priority over the pool, just because it makes sense. So that's how we review that. Tracy can give her viewpoint too.
I think you're correct, they don't, in most situations, they don't compete. They're usually department or infrastructure specific. Probably the hardest thing that I have with my funding applications is when I have to collaborate on a project. As you guys know, USDA can take a very long time from the beginning to before we start construction. And so the timing of trying to say, okay, we're going to tear up all of these streets for water, we're going to get the USDA funding, so now I want to apply over here at LGRF or something on the street side. We might get that funding, which has a deadline, a very quick deadline, usually within 1 year, before we even get the funding in place for USDA. So trying to collaborate and time and combine 2 totally different funding sources is one of the hardest things to do.
Yep.
One final question. Tracy, you're doing a wonderful job with grant application. Thank you for your efforts. But with this ambitious ICIP plan, do we need a grant writer, or do we need another source besides Tracy, who's very busy, to apply for all this funding? And then once we apply for this funding, to see the funding through and actually follow the grants, that takes an exorbitant amount of time. Do we have the personnel and the staffing to do that?
We've been doing that through our contracts, especially with our engineer. They provide a lot of guidance to us, and they do a lot of the legwork. So far, that's working. If we get to a point where we have 10 or 12 or 15 different projects totaling 20 or 25 million, we may need to hire a person for that.
Thank you. What I'd like to do at this time is I'd like to ask each one of you department heads, one at a time, to come to the mic and give us an overview of what you feel is the top priority in your department and why. So let's start with Mr. Johnson over here.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
What we have here is mostly our priorities is the refrigerated air systems for most of our buildings are aging and getting, ridiculously to the point to where it costs a lot of money to keep them up. And, some of them are over 15 years, 20 years old and done their life expectancy. A lot of these are for the buildings and stuff that we're occupied or servicing the public. So we do like to keep that and also keep our employees, and well conditioned. A lot of them are bad and they're not cheap. But we have other priorities as well. We have the awning at the City Hall building, which is in terrible condition, has been for a couple of years. And the tile that's on it, the terracotta tile up there is just cracked and tore up from years of people walking on it, putting up Christmas decorations and everything else. And I want to replace that with our panel, steel, decorative, so it looks nice. And, maybe at some point or another, add some additional lighting for the TRC sign that's up on it. We also have the Civic Center, which is, utilized a lot, and it does require a new roof coating on it and painting because it looks shabby right now. So these are my priorities, though I do have many, as far as covering many buildings and stuff, as far as, being more efficient for electricity, power. Windows are in bad shape. A lot of them are from, the 50s or whatnot. They're not exactly, of the quality that we need to keep our costs down. The golf course, the pro shop is another priority that needs a lot of attention. The roof and remodeling of the inside once I figure out or get an idea of what they want to do for the inside of the building for as far as the pro shop is concerned. As far as the Hamilton Museum is another issue that needs addressing as far as a water filtration system, because for some reason or another they can't flush out the dirt out of the water system there. Even if they run it continuously, we just can't get it out. I think a lot of it has to do with the infrastructure of the water lines around where the source is, and her line happens to be, I'm talking about Maggie's for the museum, is that it is the end of the line. So all that dirt and stuff, when they start replacing all the plumbing and everything, that dirt gets into the line system, and it's hard for them to keep up with all the leaks. I mean, there are just constant leaks over there in that area. So we would like to put a decent filtration system to the building, so that way the drinking water, the water for the bathrooms and stuff won't have all this, mineral deposits that build up. It also saves wear and tear on the drinking fountains and the coolers and everything else. That's pretty much it. But, like I say, I do have a lot of buildings that need a lot of attention as far as the outside, infrastructure and everything else is concerned. Trying to keep up with it with a minimum budget that we have is a chore, and we don't get a lot of funding from anything else. We do ask other departments to help fund from their department to add or contribute to the cost. So we try to keep up as best we can with the minimal workforce that we have. So, any questions?
Any questions from the commission? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Let's do Benny next.
Good morning, Commissioners. Yeah, my priorities would be to start preserving some of the roads we already got and trying to preserve some of the ones that are getting close to failing. I went through and done Marie Street all the way from Date all the way up because it's a major carrier. Everybody goes out to the golf course or out to the gun club and all that, so it carries a lot of traffic, but it's pretty much shot. So I done a mill and fill on that one, and you know, we're looking at about 300 grand to do that strip of road right there. And I done it in a 3-phase deal. But we got a lot of streets that are close to failing, if not failing already. So chip seal is one of the cheapest ways to take care of that, because you can chip seal the road and that'll give you 6 years of life usually on it, add to it. So if we could start chipping some of the ones that are already fairly decent roads, that would preserve them for a longer period of time. And then if we could do some of that mill and fill on some of the ones that are totally shot, that would help too. I done an estimate on, well, for an example, I done an estimate on Folk Street, because we kind of chipped the first part of that, because we done that in 3 or 4 phases too when we paved it. So I done an estimate on that one, and you're looking at about $25,000 to chip it from 4th Street all the way up to Marie, I mean. So it's quite a bit of savings when you do that, instead of actually paving the street again. But that would be my priority, to maybe start doing a little bit more of that.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you, sir. OJ?
Morning, Commissioners, Mr. Madrid. I've got 2 major priorities, and that would be the Luis Armijo Sports Complex, and that would be Ralph Edwards Park. The reason being for that is because we've started them. I would like to continue working on all the improvements on the ball fields, as well as Ralph Edwards Park, until we get them where they need to be. And then we can move forward with something else, so we don't get spread out too far. Obviously, when you look at the Luis Armijo Sports Complex, we did make some major improvements over there at Phelps Field this last year. We need to catch up A Field, and we need to catch up the softball field that are next to it. One of the other things is that we need to consider too is the bathroom situation out there. We've got one boys urinal or men's urinal toilet, and we have one woman's urinal or toilet, or just toilet, but one sink. And I know at night I've heard about people wanting to bring porta potties in and things, because the lines get extensive out there, they get long, because there is only one for each. So that's something that we need to look into as well. The soccer field is something that we did the best we could. When I started here a couple of years ago, it was already started. It was something that we jumped into the middle of. It wasn't done professionally. It wasn't done correct. It's not indicative of the direction that we're trying to get these parks and these recreation facilities heading. And then, of course, there's Ralph Edwards Park, which we've already started with the master plan. We should have some final figures here within the next 2 to 3 months, so we'll know where we're going with that as well. But those are priorities right now for the Parks Department. So
Thank you.
if there's any questions.
Questions? Thank you. Kristen and Andy.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mayor Pro Tem.
Good morning.
Commissioners, I'm sorry. So we're looking at a Mobart wood haul. Approximate cost is around $375,000. So with this piece of equipment, the waste, the green waste, the tree limbs, construction material and stuff that we're transporting down to Carlitos, this machine will eliminate a lot of that. We're looking at a savings of maybe $110,000 a year in savings. And this machine would be able to pay itself off in approximately 3 years. So, also with the wood chips and stuff, like OJ Streets, they can use these wood chips around the park areas. We can even
give them to the public. Maybe looking to working with wastewater with Jesse and mixing it to make more compost. Maybe bag that compost and generate some revenue off it. More time. What else am I missing? So that's one of my priorities. I think if we can divert, or not transport all this green waste in these 2x4s, take some of that out of the waste stream and reuse it, be a bit costly.
Thank you. Have any questions? Thank you, guys. Bo?
Morning, Mayor. Mayor Pro Tem. Kathy, you still there? She's not there.
I think she's there somewhere.
Good morning, Commissioners. Mr. Madrid. We went ahead and put the streetlights changed over to LED on the ICIP. Noticed a lot of communities around the states switching over to LED. We've been still having problems with people wanting to go outside, look at the stars, and lights are shining in their back windows and stuff. So this probably would be a good project. Pole and wire conductor replacement. We've been replacing a lot of poles around town. A lot of primary underground that's old, that's been put in back in the 70s. We just finished the Corona Camino del Celio project up there, replaced all the primary underground transformers. We replaced 3 poles and conductor going across the interstate, got rid of the single phase, went 3-phase. We did another project up on Pershing, Tradewind. We replaced the underground up there. I also put in four more projects in the budget for next year to replace conductor, primary underground conductor that was direct burial, that was never put in conduit. It was done back in the 70s. That needs to be done. I'm starting to focus a little bit more on their substation. The substation was given to us back in, I think, the 70s, 80s. The primary feeders that go from the switch gear out to the poles that go up overhead and is getting really, really old. It's the original. We need to start working on doing that, start doing some upgrades on our substation too. Our substation is one of our main priorities of the electrical system. So, but we've been working on it. I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Do I have any questions? Thank you, Bo.
Thank you.
Jesse?
Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners, Mr. Madrid. I'd love to tell you guys that the underground piping would be our #1 priority. And that would be the incorrect answer. Our biggest problem is going to be our pumps, valves, controls, electrical on all of our different substations that we have around town. A lot of those items are the ones that are causing a lot of our breaks. The age of the infrastructure certainly doesn't help, but it's those controls that are causing a lot of our issues at this point in time, just due to water hammer effects. They were installed with, one of them has a soft start that, if you guys are familiar with electrical controls, it slowly ramps up the speed of the pump, but they're not controllable. You can't really tell it how fast or how slow, so they're kind of predetermined by past set points, and now we're beyond those set points. We would benefit by having some variable control frequency valves, VFDs, that we could put in there, so we could manually adjust those things ourselves. The underground infrastructure would be #2, and it's certainly just as important, if not right at the same level. We have had 5 main breaks in the last 3 days, and spent lots of hours out working on those. But those again were caused by some pumps that are just aging. That's for water. I'll stand for any questions for the water side.
Thank you. Questions? Thank you.
Okay. Would you like wastewater
Yes,
now?
please.
Okay. For wastewater, one of our biggest needs is going to be, obviously the underground infrastructure across town is very antiquated. We have clay lines in some places. We have the Orangeburg pipe, which is basically just tar paper, rolled into a cast, and then they slide it off after it dries. So the infrastructure for the wastewater would be a big, it would be our number one priority for wastewater, and it's also the largest cost. If we do the wastewater underground lines, though, the infrastructure for it, that would be an opportunity to do the water as well. From water and wastewater standpoint, when we look at underground lines, we have to think from the surface all the way through the surfacing of the road down through the subsurface to compaction point, So we have to look at it from a much larger cost aspect than most departments do. And in some of these values that I put on the ICIP for infrastructure for water and wastewater, they're pretty high numbers, 120 million plus, and that is counting a lot of that subsurface compaction all the way up to new surfacing on the roads. But it would have to be done joint. That's our biggest problem, is if we just do water, then we come back and then a year later our wastewater fails. So we have to really blend those two together and try and make those projects feasible at the same time, which is a difficult task to do because water funding might be large one year and wastewater might be skimpy, and then the next year they're reversed from our state funding and maybe some EPA funding. So that it's hard to get those costs aligned. But that would be our biggest cost up front right there.
Thank you, Jesse. Are there any questions for Jesse?
Now, I know in many areas, they've been using these in situ repairs on the sewer lines where they actually they put a balloon through there and then pump in a slurry, and forms around there. Is that feasible in any of our lines, or are there other factors, down there that we need to correct as well as just the lines themselves?
I think it would be feasible in some areas. Other areas, not so much. We would have to just kind of, biggest concern would be, is the sleeve going to pull through? If it's cast iron pipe, they tend to get kind of growth and peaks and stuff on them. Obviously, we wouldn't be able to pull a 4-inch sleeve through there. If it was an older PVC pipe that was thin wall maybe, then yeah, we could look at doing a pull-through option on those, definitely. That would help reduce a lot of those costs.
Right, because you don't have to dig it up and resurface the roads. Back in St. Louis, they used that a lot, but again, that would depend if you've got subsurface issues, like wasn't bedded properly and such in the first place. Those areas you'd obviously have to dig down and
tackle it head on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Jesse? Jesse, thank you.
Thank you.
Chief's next.
Mayor, Commissioners, Mr. Madrid. Basically, of the categories, I rated them 1 to 5. The fleet vehicles, obviously, we feel like is the most important. We have to roll, answer calls, and so forth, so they need to be replenished periodically. The state police has about 130,000 miles on their vehicle. That's their rule of thumb, where they replenish them. sometimes earlier. We need to keep that going, obviously, thanks to Tracy and the USDA. We just received 4 new ones. And what I did on the ICIP, you'll see every year through 2025, that's what we feel like we'll need at this point. Could change, but you've got to keep the vehicles maintained. It's a safety factor. And then again, it's a maintenance issue with a cost if you don't replenish your vehicles. So I think it's a real reasonable, we planned it out that way, that at some point we need some unmarked vehicles for administrative purposes. They last a lot longer and so forth. We have some vehicles, like Explorers, we bought them in 2017. We have one that's around 35,000 miles. So we put a lot of mileage. We're rolling all night long, answering calls. So it's very important to keep vehicles safe and maintained and replenished. And I know Tracy mentioned we have to be fair. Certain entities, agencies need stuff also, and we understand that. But we do need to replenish them as we go along. So I covered it up to 2025. We'll keep an eyeball on that, and we might have to change some of the amounts. But okay, the second thing is the records management system, RMS. That is what we use for our incident reports, crash report, and so forth. We use a system called Sleuth. They're changing their name to be Global, and I know it's kind of complicated, but in 2021. The state's requiring that we go into what they call National Incident-Based Reporting System. In English, that means we're using a summary-based system. We're adding numbers. And in 2021, they want us to use the NIBR system, which, because the FBI has told them to do that. And what that does, it changes the way cases are reported. Right now, if there's let's say a person's house is broken into a burglary, and there's an assault, criminal sexual case, and a murder. Right now, it's tabulated by the highest ranking crime. They go by priority, so it would be 1 murder. That's all they count. Under the new system, they're going to count all those crimes, all those major crimes. So you'll have a murder, a robbery, a criminal sexual act, and so forth. So that's the NIBR system, and we got to go to that. And you see, it's pretty expensive. $22,000, that is an annual maintenance fee, and we're going to try to do that this coming fiscal year, 1920, starting July. And we've been working with them. It's going to require a lot of training, but we need to move that way, so that's a pretty hefty expense. The third, I put in priority with the evidence tracking system. Picture all our evidence in our evidence room, little tiny things, jewelry, drugs, whatever. It'd be like Walmart doing it manually, reordering, keeping inventory. That's what we're doing right now. So we need to move to a barcode system, and that's $8,500 and an annual maintenance fee about $4,000. So we need to move to that, become, get into the 21st century. And number 4, animal shelter. We're in good shape. We have it's 1,425 square feet. It's new, but we do need a playground on the side. We looked into that. We got a volunteer that I can't believe Becky Porter spent 6 months working on this grant, which I'll be bringing up in July for your approval. It's $39,000 and change. If we get it, which she thinks we'll get it, no match, you'll have actually looks like AstroTurf on the side. They recommend that against grass now. You don't have to water it. It's maintenance free. It lasts about 10 years, 8 to 10 years. And we'll have a doggy playground on the side with obstacles, playground for the dogs. People want to adopt, they can walk the dog and see how it acts. So it's really great. If we don't get the grant, which I think we will, we might be putting in for that from city funding if we can. That's pretty important. An expansion, I mentioned that Frank Bryce came down and did a survey and said we're in good shape. We're one of the best animal shelters he's seen in a long time. But the thing is, somewhere along the line we might have to expand. And we're looking at maybe 1,000 feet more. We're getting a lot of animals in. It's overflowing now with kittens. we're Kitten City. I'm telling you, we got 42 kittens down there. And I was leaving, and we were just talking about the headache with the kittens, and the lady brings in a basket of a cat with, 4 or 5 more kittens. So we've got to think of the future and maybe expansion, so that'd be number 4. And the last, number 5, David and I worked on this. We're actually, our doors in our police department are hollow doors, and they really need to be a little bit, it's like Fort Knox with plywood doors. You need to have these expensive doors with a combination where we don't have to use a key every time. And David and I worked, it's about $18,000. So that'd be number 5. So with that, I'll entertain any questions.
Thank you, Chief. Are there any questions for the Chief? Thank you.
Yes.
Again, I would like to thank each and every one of you for your ideas and your wishes. I know this is a great big wish list for everybody, for our city. We will look it over. The next ICIP public hearing will be July 10th, 2019, and that gives us time to review everything, and hopefully we can kind of give everybody a little bit of something, hopefully. But again, thank you. Thank you.
Mayor?
Yes, Kathy.
Excuse me.
Yes.
So very quiet for an hour, 53 minutes and 55 seconds, actually. But there's a couple of comments that I'd like to make before we move off of this subject, if you don't mind.
Thank you. Go right ahead.
So not being able to see everybody and just having to be very attentive and listen to the words, there are a couple of comments that I would like to make. One is, by observation, I want to thank Mr. Madrid, Manager Madrid, for being so considerate of our department heads. This is the first time I've probably been so impressed in 5.5 years that that our department heads, as they should be always, very well respected, because they do indeed know their department. And I really appreciate hearing each one of the department heads come up with so much, it's almost as if the study has been done and the integrity is coming through so evidently just through the voice. And I don't sometimes notice that when you're watching people, but actually hearing them. And it's very evident that these department heads know their stuff. And I'm very proud of them and very impressed. And I just wanted to let you know that from this vantage point, Mayor, I also want to thank you for making it very important that everybody, including the manager, is part of this project in our city, not just one person as a dictatorial kind of vantage. And that's what's coming across. And I just wanted to make that comment to you and to say thank you not only to Manager Madrid, but every single department head, and to Tracy for her extraordinary work. It's very evident. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, this next item on our agenda this morning is the consent calendar. The consent calendar consists of 3 items. Item D1, acknowledge the Public Utility Advisory Board minutes for April 8th, 2019. D2, acknowledge the Public Arts Advisory Board minutes, November 13th, 2018. And D3, approve the appointment of City Manager Morris Madrid and Clerk Treasurer Renee Canton as alternate on the SCRTA Board. I will stand for a motion.
Mayor Whitehead, I'd like to move that we accept the consent calendar as you have just read, items 1, 2, and 3.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the consent calendar with items D1 through 3 as noted. Is there any questions, comments, concerns? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. The next item on our agenda this morning is item E, ordinances, resolutions, and zoning. E1, discussion action, ordinance number 705 for publication, refunding of PPRF 2246, and new money for infrastructure projects, including the loan agreement, intercept agreement, and closing documents. City Manager Madrid.
Mayor and Commissioners, a little bit of background on this particular item. We had discussed, I had met with the Mexico Finance Authority regarding our debt schedule, our debt load, and what opportunities we may have there a couple of months ago. They recommended some of the restructuring that we have already approved. The next item is one of those. So, in general, what the Finance Authority helped determine, and working with us and reviewing all of our financial statements, is that we had opportunity to not only refinance some of our debt at a better rate, but to restructure it so that we eliminate some of it and we have opportunities for future financing without increasing our annual debt service. That's what this is. This was just a question. What I asked was, can you determine what our ceiling would be to establish a kind of line of credit for Tier C? If we didn't incur any more debt service, if we didn't place any additional load on our budget, how much could we borrow? Kind of a refinancing of a mortgage. So what they did was they did that analysis and they took it to their board right away for approval. They didn't even request it. They got approval for the amount of this item here, this loan agreement. The amount is $2,550,147. The interest rate is 2.2%. That would be over a 10-year period from 2020 to 2029. The annual payments are about $269,000. This does not mean that we would borrow, use, or spend all of this money. This is a 2-month process. This is the first step in that process in case we want to take advantage of this opportunity. Final approval wouldn't be till the end of August. But I did provide the NMFA some of the concepts that we talked about, including things that were discussed at our retreat for priorities, improving our infrastructure, improving some of our facilities, improving our IT equipment. All those things were included on a list of concepts. It's my intent that this commission would still determine the priorities for any of this money that is spent and would be subject to that approval. This is just in an effort to position ourselves in relation to, number one, the ICIP that we just talked about now, and for example, if we got a $9 million loan for water and wastewater projects, and we got 0 for street projects, or we got some for street projects, then we would still be able to follow through if we use some of this money to, when we tore up the street, to put it back and get a new street out of it also, and then not go back there for another 10 or 15 or 20 years. This just gives us the ability to plan. And because it takes a while, I wanted to start that process now. And the budget is available. I haven't included this in our final budget yet because we're showing, I think the savings was about $263,000. The cost of this financing is $269,000. So we would spend about $6,000 more a year. The reserves are already there. And based on that, I ask for your approval to publish the ordinance related to this loan.
Thank you, Manager Madrid. Do we have any questions, comments, concerns? Commissioners?
All right, just so I'm clear on what's going on here. We had an existing loan, PPRF 2246, is that correct?
We had three different ones
Three different.
that we were combining, consolidating.
Okay, and this consolidates those three loans, is that correct?
This eliminates two of them, continues one of them, which is our next item, and would establish this one on its own.
Okay, so,
These are paid for through an intercept at Taxation and Revenue. They actually capture that before it comes to us.
okay, so basically we're taking three loans and consolidating it down to two with these two actions, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Thank you. Commissioner Clark, do you have any questions?
No, well, just the only thing is, were these three loans always on an intercept, Mr. Madrid?
Yes,
Okay, so the process is not coming back down to us to write a check on these loans, it's just consolidating all of it.
that's correct. Just the intercept amount will change a little bit.
Okay, thank you, Mayor, that's the only question.
Thank you. Are there any further questions, comments, concerns?
I'll make a comment. I thought it was a really good presentation by Mr. Madrid. I might just want to mention something for the commission to look at between now, which is the publication action, and then when we have the final hearing. If you want to get maybe a better idea of the numbers involved, you got a very thick packet of information here, and I understand there's a lot to go through, but just to boil something down for you to make it easier for you to understand, you'll see, according to the cover sheet, that there's like three documents, three attachments. There's the ordinance, the loan agreement, and the intercept agreement. The ordinance is first. It's about 13 pages with an attachment. Then you have the loan agreement, which is 24 pages. But what I thought would be helpful for you just to look at, between now and the final hearing, attached to the loan agreement is Exhibit A1 and A2. It's just 2 pages, so it's in the back of the loan agreement. And actually, that kind of sets forth and actually summarizes what Mr. Madrid just mentioned to us. It tells you the project description. It mentions the 2009 loan. And then I really like on page A2, it actually gives you the numbers, but it tells you when the payments are going to be made. You have the interest payment. You have when the first principal payment is going to be, when the last payment would be. So it kind of sets it. I just thought those 2 pages were really good to kind of set out really what's going on here, as opposed to having to plow through, 50 pages worth of materials. So just free to look at between now and the next meeting, or next one goes to the final adoption.
Thank you, Attorney Rubin. Are there any further questions, comments, concerns? Hearing none, I will stand for a motion.
Mayor Whitehead, I'd like to make a motion to approve ordinance number 705 for publication, refunding, which is the refunding of PPRF 2246 in new money for infrastructure projects, including the loan agreement, intercept agreement, and closing documents as presented by Manager Madrid and explained by our attorney, Jay Rubin.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second that. You got it.
I have a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 705 for publication as noted by Commissioner Heschler. Is there any further questions, comments, concerns? Hearing none, I will ask for a roll call. I don't need a roll call? Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. I would just like to note also that Mayor Pro Tem Clark is in attendance via the telephone. She is not a live body sitting in our meeting today. And thank you for being on the phone. The next item on our agenda is item E2, discussion action, resolution number 501819, approving the loan agreement and closing documents for the refunding of PPRF 1704 and the RIP 9516, City Manager Madrid.
Mayor, Commissioners, this is the final action on the consolidation and restructuring. This agreement is separate, just to provide for the contingency that we do not move forward with the
the one that you just approved. This one needs to be, taken care of either way. So in the event that we would not move forward with the other financing, this one is taken care of. It was previously approved. This is the final loan document for your approval.
Thank you. Do I have any questions from the commission? Mayor Pro Tem Clark, do you have any questions? Did she disappear? Are you still there?
No, I'm sorry, I just muted out because sometimes it gets a little noisy here.
Okay.
Pardon me.
Do you have any questions?
City manager, so, can you give me a little more information about this particular, closing document for the refunding of, PPRF? Because, I'm a little confused.
Okay. The main thing is this loan consolidates three of them that were in existence before, and they are...
Number one? That's the number one discussion?
Yes, this is a piece of that, and the loan numbers... I should probably read these loan numbers into the record anyway. This loan consolidates Finance Authority loan number DW-0442, which was set to mature in 2021. Loan number TPRF 2737, which was scheduled to mature in 2033. And PPRF 2613, which was scheduled to mature in 2032. That's the purpose of this one loan.
Okay, so, thank you, I just appreciate that clarification, I think that was good. Thank you very much, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner Clark. Any further questions, comments, concerns? Hearing none, I will stand for a motion.
Madam Mayor, I would move to approve resolution number 5018/19, approving the loan agreement and closing documents for the refunding of PPRF 1704 and RIP 9516 as presented by City Manager Madrid.
And do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and 2 seconds to approve resolution number 501819, approving the loan agreement and closing documents for the refunding of PPRF 1704 and RIP 9516. Manager Madrid, just for clarification, would you describe RIP? It doesn't mean rest in peace, so.
I can't, Mayor. I really don't remember what that means. I'm sorry.
I think it's a refunding of infrastructure plan.
Oh, yeah, the refunding infrastructure plan.
Yeah, the R is for refunding.
Money improvement plan, something to that.
Something like that.
Thank you, thank you. Is there any further discussion, questions, comments, concerns? Hearing none, Madam Clerk, I will stand for roll call.
Honorable Sandra Whitehead.
Aye.
Honorable Kathy Clark.
Aye.
Honorable Ralph Heschler.
Aye.
Honorable Paul Baca.
Aye.
Honorable George Getty.
Aye.
Kathy Clark, did you get Kathy?
You know what, Mayor, it's so funny to hear this from this angle.
I get, yeah.
Yeah.
Rest in peace.
Let's add a little humor.
Well, that's what, you know,
Good work.
RIP, rest in peace. All right.
All right.
Motion carries. Yes, ma'am. The next item on our agenda this morning is item E3, discussion action resolution number 471819, authorizing acceptance of Colonias Infrastructure Fund Project number 4927, CIF Water Infrastructure Project Tier C Municipal Water System from NMFA, City Manager Madrid.
Mayor and Commissioners, while Tracy walks up to give us a little bit of background on how this works, the purpose of this item is to accept the funding and to guarantee that we do have the matching funds in place. But I would like Tracy to give us a little background on how this funding works.
Thank you, Manager Madrid. This
On
is
the
for
spot.
I wasn't prepared for this one. This is for the NMFA Colonias PER funding that we received for the municipal water system. So it was a grant match loan. The resolution is part of the readiness to proceed items. It's actually the final item that we need to proceed forward, secure the funding, and get started on the PER.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. Now the PER,
PER.
preliminary engineering report. This preliminary engineering report is to basically do an assessment of our system, correct?
Correct. It's for the
That's going to
entire-
help us determine, from an engineering point of view, additional priorities. Are we getting it right? And what should we do first within our system? So this is probably going to be one of the keys in addressing some of our water infrastructure issues. Recommend your approval, Mayor.
Thank you. Is there any further questions, comments, concerns? Hearing none, I will, go ahead. Come in. Go ahead.
Excuse me, Mayor, is Jesse up there?
No, Jesse's gone, but Tracy's up here. Would you like to ask Tracy?
No, it was a question I was gonna ask Jesse. I'll pose it, next time I see him.
Thank you.
Fine.
Thank you. I will stand for a motion.
Mayor Whitehead, I move for the approval of resolution number 47, 18-19, authorizing acceptance of Colonias Infrastructure Fund project number 4927-CIF, water infrastructure project for Truth or Consequences Municipal Water System from the New Mexico Finance Authority, as presented by Manager Madrid.
And do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second approving resolution number 4718, as noted by Commissioner Heschler. Is there any further questions, comments, concerns? Hearing none.
Mayor, please.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
I heard Jesse say something that really kind of struck a note with me, and I want to pose this to Manager Madrid since Jesse's not there. This is water infrastructure, but one of the things that we have not really looked at that I can remember for a long period of time, we've looked at our pipes and the condition of the pipes, and we've looked at this and that and the other, but we've never really looked at the pressure going through that blows the pipes out. And I'm wondering if this infrastructure water project is including that particular item, because it is really critical, and it's something that me as a commissioner, I've kind of missed. And if that's what's creating some issues, if our pressure is going from one point to another and it's taking a tiny little pinpoint and then blowing it into a huge crack, have we added that into this infrastructure project analysis?
Yes, Commissioner, and that was exactly Jesse's description in his listing of the priorities. The pressure control pumps and valves within the system were his number one priority over and above the piping itself.
And I'm, and I think that there's some real huge merit to that. And if we don't know what the pressure is going from one pipe to another in the different pipes that we've got in that whole infrastructure, if we've got that in there, I'm not sure we have it.
No, we don't. That's going to be part of the assessment.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Are there any further questions, comments, concerns? Hearing none, Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Honorable Senator Whitehead.
Aye.
Honorable Kathy Clark.
Aye.
Honorable Ralph Fischler.
Aye.
Honorable Paul Barker.
Aye.
Honorable George Sacchetti.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. The next item on our agenda this morning is item E4, discussion action, resolution number 48-1819, designating signatory authority for the New Mexico Finance Authority Drinking Water Revolving Loan Fund related to documentation. City Manager Madrid.
Mayor and Commissioners, this is a formality required by the granting agency so that they understand that you have appointed someone to act on your behalf when we draw money or request reimbursements from the funding entity. They know that I am acting on your behalf.
Thank you. Excuse me, does she need? Is there any questions, comments, concerns? Hearing none, I will stand for a motion.
Madam Mayor, I move to approve resolution number 4818/19, designating signatory authority for the New Mexico Finance Authority Drinking Water Revolving Loan Fund related to documentation as presented by City Manager Madrid.
And do I have a second?
I'll second it.
I have a motion and a second to approve resolution number 481819 as noted by Commissioner Zaghetti. Is there any further questions, comments, concerns? Hearing none.
One question, is that signature authority directly Manager Madrid?
Yes,
So you're the one that's going to actually...
yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, would you please call roll?
Honorable Sandra Whitehead.
Aye.
Honorable Kathy Clark.
Aye.
Honorable Ralph Fessler.
Aye.
Honorable Paul Baca.
Aye.
Honorable George Segretti.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. The next item on our agenda this morning is item E5, discussion action resolution number 491819, approving the final fiscal year 2018-19 budget adjustments. City Manager Madrid.
Mayor and Commissioners, this is the final part of our current year budget cleanup. We have to show the Department of Finance Administration that we ended the year as projected in the black and in good standing. We have to show our auditors that our expenses were in the right place, our revenues were in the right place, and our budget was sufficient to meet our obligations at the end of the year. So, there's three pieces to it. The first piece is to take expenditures, for example, that were charged to the wrong department or the wrong fund, and put them in the right place. Those are done through adjusting journal entries. It's an accounting thing. So that part has been done to the extent that we need. Every single line item does not have to be in the black. The budget control is at the category level. For example, personnel, salaries and benefits is one category. That category has to finish the year in the black with sufficient budget. Operating costs, capital outlay, those are the other ones. So that's how we address the budget. We first look and make sure that the expenditures are in the right place. For example, when Ms. Canton was interim city manager, that her salary was charged for the manager's duties to the city manager's budget. If there were transfers among employees, that the expenses follow them into the right place. That's been taken care of. The next two parts are to get the budget into the right place. If we had intended for a project to be expended from a capital outlay account and it was in an operating account, then we need to take the budget and move it into the capital account where it should have been expended from. In some case, we need to adjust the expenses, sometimes the budget. The third part that you're going to see in here, and it's right at the beginning of some of these accounts, is to clean up the funds and bank accounts that we're no longer using. Some of these are 10 or 15 years old and have a balance that is not restricted to be transferred to another account where it can be used. I'll go through them individually very briefly. The first one is, and I think you're looking at the DFA format, is to transfer budget from a recreation fund that's no longer used and cash and the expenses there to the general fund to close that recreation account. I think there's the next 7, 8, 9, maybe 10 of them. Close the Veterans Wall Perpetual Care Bank account and move it to the regular Veterans Wall account. In some cases, we have to do the budget adjustments for both the revenue and expense. You'll see that on the worksheet. We have a police department confidential funds bank account. That hasn't been used. When the confidential funds are requested, they can be taken from the operating account. This will close that fund and bank account and transfer it to their donations account where the confidential funds will be accounted for in a single line item instead of using a whole fund. The senior grants account, the adjustments you'll see are in column E. Columns D and F are the very big numbers. We're not adjusting by that much. The adjustments are in column E. We're closing the senior grant bank account, and those had been funds that accumulated that were, it looked like they were matching funds that are not restricted for use. So we're putting some of them back in the general fund and some of them in the street fund where we can use them for the 68,000 is going to still be dedicated to the Senior Citizen Center. That's going to be part of the paving and striping project for the parking lot right outside here. So although the funds aren't restricted, we thought that it would be good to keep them close to the intended purpose and improving the facility here and the surrounding parking lot. The next group is to close the capital improvement general accounts. We already have other accounts. This $68 had been there for a long time. In the joint utility accounts, we have other emergency accounts. I don't know why we had multiple ones. The ordinance only requires one for each utility. This will consolidate all of those. Each utility will have its own emergency account. And I think yesterday was the first time in a couple of years that we've utilized those emergency accounts. We did have a major water line break. The staff had been out all night on another one, so we had to hire a contractor to fix a main water line, and surprisingly it wasn't as expensive as you would think. Anyway, those emergency accounts are in place, and they do have balances that have accumulated over a number of years. The repair replacement water bank account is the same thing. The repair and replacement, we have one account for reserve for improvements, and we have another one for emergencies. We're transferring this amount to the emergency repair account because over the last few years, the required amount, I think, is $10,000, hadn't been consistently transferred in. So we're catching up on those also. The last one is, the last two are to budget donations for the McAdoo Street improvements. Those had been donated and the improvements been done, but the budget had not been put in place. So this is to catch up on having the budget in place. We're adjusting it up to accommodate the donation, which was never budgeted, and now is and reflects the action that took place on McAdoo Street. Then we have the State Fire Fund where we received funding that was awarded, that wasn't budgeted. That's to just increase that budget. Even if we don't have any expenditures within those, if we have revenue sources for grants or donations or anything like that, if we don't budget them, then all we show is the cash. And that cash can get lost in the following year. This shows that if we budgeted this year and we didn't spend it, we should budget it next year again. The next few of them are corrections to the CDBG accounts. The budget was approved and was expended. We received revenues that they were reimbursements. They were not actual grant revenues. Those have already been spent and the grant has been closed out. So we're showing that we have budget that's not expended, that should have been, when that's not the case. That grant was received, expended, and closed on a timely basis, but the budget balances were not addressed. The Veterans Wall, we had some residual cash that we are budgeting, just so that our cash and our amounts available coincide. Like I said before, we don't want to have, for special revenue funds, we shouldn't have excess cash that we haven't budgeted for, because generally they're for a specific purpose, like the Veterans Wall. We have other funding. This one is from USDA. We needed to budget the revenue received for the police vehicles. We needed to, the final payment for the animal shelter was in excess of the total budget for the project. So we needed to budget the $5,220 so we wouldn't end up in the red. The $30,000 that you see there for legal settlement, that was recent, that was not budgeted, so we had to budget as an expenditure. That's in 301. That was the same place that it was deposited into, which was the impact fee fund. The other ones are, there were projects that were undertaken in the electrical department that were paid for in the operating instead of the construction account. They were budgeted in the construction account, but were processed through the operating account. So we had to take the budget back from the construction, put it back in the operating where it matches where the expenditures are. The other ones in the capital improvement are again, basic cleanups where we just increase or decrease the budget to match the expenses. So they'll finish with a zero balance. The last one in the electrical, it was for the Cielo Vista substation project, again, was budgeted in the operating but paid for from the Fund 503, and we're transferring the budget to catch up to where the expense was. The airport ones are revenues and expenditures that had not been previously budgeted. Those are just to establish the budget for the revenues and the expense both. That brings us to the end of the year where they'll finish in the black. That's a description of the cleanup. This is the final portion in addressing our closeout. I do want to let you know that in reviewing the almost final expenses, we may have another $2,000 or $3,000 in bills to pay today and tomorrow. Our final payroll is already posted. The general fund looks like it's going to end the year with about $280,000 in reversion amounts that's going to go back into the general fund, which means that I can't believe that, whether it's a coincidence or not, that was the excess amount that we got in our distribution from the small cities allocation. So we ended up in good shape in the general fund. The other funds too were, when you see the final budget in July, you'll see that our projections are coming out reasonably close for last year, and we'll be on target again for next year. This is our this is required by DFA as a cleanup, and I will present the final budget standing after we close out the year, so you can see how each department and each fund finished the year in relation to what we had projected. Recommend your approval, Mayor and Commissioners.
Thank you, Manager Madrid. Any questions, comments, concerns? Mayor Pro Tem Clark, do you have questions or comments?
Yeah, I have a comment, and that is thank you, Manager Madrid. It's nice to have you on board, and I really appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any further questions, comments, concerns? If not, I will stand for a motion.
Senator Whitehead, I move to approve resolution number 4018/19, approving the final fiscal year budget 2018 and 2019, to approve the budget adjustment as presented by City Manager Madrid.
And do I have a second?
Second.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a motion and a second to approve resolution number 491819, approving the final fiscal year 2018-19 budget adjustment as presented by City Manager Madrid. Is there any further questions, comments, concerns? Attorney Rubin, do you have any questions?
No, I do not. No.
Hearing none, Madam Clerk, I will stand for roll call.
Honorable Sandra Whitehead.
Aye.
Honorable Kathy Clark.
Aye.
Honorable Raul Peschler.
Aye.
Honorable Paul Baca.
Aye.
Honorable George Sacchetti.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries. The next item on our agenda is item F under new business. F1, discussion action, approve the recommendation of the Public Arts Board to reappoint Sid Bryan, Carrie Jagger-Gustin, Andy Underwood, and Eduardo Alicia. City Manager Madrid.
Mayor, Commissioners, I attended their last meeting. They don't have any major issues pending, but their terms are expiring. And they did all consent to continue serving in their capacities as members. And they did take a vote and make a formal recommendation. I concur with the recommendation.
Thank you. Is there any questions, comments, concerns?
Just wanted to make sure there were no other applicants for membership on the board.
No.
Thank you. I will stand for a motion. I will make that motion. I will move to approve the recommendation of the Public Arts Board to reappoint Sid Bryan, Carrie Jagger-Gustin, Andy Underwood, and Eduardo Alicia, as noted by Manager Madrid. Do I have a second?
Second. You got it.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any further questions, comments, concerns? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. The next item is F2 under new business, discussion action, Main Street Truth or Consequences, the MOU extension to June 30th, 2020. City Manager Madrid.
Mayor and Commissioners, this is just formality that's required so that we have this agreement in place. And it's very simple, and I recommend your approval.
Thank you. Any questions, comments, concerns?
Manager Madrid, this is the same agreement that we have as the city. We put in the budget for the funding of Main Street, correct?
That's correct, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, I'll make a motion to go ahead and approve the Main Street MOU extension to June 30th, 2020, as presented by, or mentioned by Manager Madrid.
Thank you. And do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve Main Street Truth or Consequences MOU extension to June 30th, 2020, as noted by Manager Madrid. Is there any further questions, comments, or concerns? Commissioner Zaghetti, did you have a question?
Just going back, is the, I can't remember if I saw this in, is the form, or is this MOU going to be changing in the future? I remember reading, so this is kind of the final extension until they come up with the new formula, which would be for the following year. Is that right? Okay.
Thank you. Are there any further questions, comments, or concerns? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. The next item on our agenda this morning is item G, reports. G1, City Manager.
Mayor and Commissioners, I have a few things to report on. The first one is that I received notification that the national Christmas tree will be stopping here in November. It'll only be for about an hour. But we do want to organize some type of activity. I did say that the city would support that activity. I think it's November 14th, November 14th. So that'll be a nice little event for our community. I want to let you all know that I've established a meeting every 2 weeks with leaders from the other entities, Sierra County, Williamsburg, Elephant Butte, the managers and the mayor of Williamsburg. And we discuss issues that are upcoming, that we have in common, or that we can support each other with. Our main topic yesterday was supporting the SJOA in our ICIP plans, and they did agree to do that because it is more of a regional service thing. We are going to be collaborating on a lot of different things that we have in common, whether they're events, whether they're funding endeavors, whether it's, we had a meeting of a similar group regarding communication with the Spaceport Authority and appointing a single point of contact for all of our groups so that we don't have separate discussions about different things and we're focused. So it looks like that's the direction we're going to go. They're in the process of asking Representative Rebecca Dow to take that role, and it looks like she will. She's probably the perfect one for that because she does have some authority at the state level to ask not only them to be inclusive of us, but to be accountable to us. So that type of collaboration is occurring. I also wanted to let you know and invite you all to our employee barbecue on Friday. It will be at Ralph Edwards Park from 11:30 to about 1:30. We're going to try and get our service pins handed out for employees that have worked 5, 10, 15, and 20 years at that point. So that'll be a good thing. Be hungry, we're going to have a lot of food. We are continuing with selection of a contractor for our AMI project for the electric department. We're going to be interviewing some of the finalists week after next, and we should make a selection for you by early August, a recommendation for you, not a selection for you, a recommendation to you by early August. That'll be a good project, and implementation will probably be early in the fall. The last thing and best thing that I want to report, if I was a drinking man, I might even open a beer in this meeting because I think we have a finance director. I interviewed yesterday, and I think we have a candidate that is competent, that may work out. We haven't made a formal offer yet, but I can't wait. That's my report.
Thank you. Attorney Rubin, do you have a report? Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Clark, do you have a report?
Yeah, you know what, Manager Madrid, I'll send you a root beer.
Thank you. I'll enjoy it.
Yeah, good work. Good work. Thank you so much for everything that you've done in doing 2 positions, and I hope that this person has worked out for you well. That's all, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Baca, do you have a report?
I do not think.
Commissioner Heschler, do you have a report?
Yeah, just a couple of short things. One is that Spaceport America just finished the America's Cup, which was last week. We had 124 total teams. Washington University was the overall winner with a liquid propelled rocket, which is pretty interesting. I think that's why they won. You know, many of these students that come here for America's Cup, this is a trip of a lifetime for them because we have 14 different countries represented, 38 states. In particular, I interacted a little bit with the team from South Korea, and I asked them what their plans were after they launched their rocket. And it was pretty amusing trying to hear a person from South Korea say truth or consequence. And anyway, I was very pleased to hear that they're going to spend the next day or the following day in truth or consequences. And of course, I mentioned our hot our healing waters and our hot spas, and I'm sure they spent some time here. But it was a great event, and I know that we had a positive impact on our community, and it's just nice being part of it. The other part of my report I wanted to say is that I drove the community, and what I do before these commission meetings, I get out a little bit early and I drive the communities, and I'd like to say that it seems like we're improving a little bit in our code enforcement efforts. And I see the efforts of your staff, Manager Madrid, and there is some improvement. There's a lot left to do, and I'm hoping that, and what I want to say is that now's not the time to sit on our laurels, but to actually push harder and to keep those efforts up strongly as much as we can. In particular, I still look at that project, that property of 4th and Coach, which is right across the street from our convention center or our civic center, and we need to stay on top of those things that are really visible to our public, because those are the ones that we get the most complaints on. But overall, I think we've made some progress, and thank you for that.
Thank you. Commissioner Zachetti.
Okay, a couple of items. On Saturday evening, I attended an event out at Ralph Edwards Park. What was it? What did they call that again?
It was Head Start.
Oh, it was the Head Start.
It was a family fun event, something.
And there were representatives there from all of the family service organizations we have in the area, CYFD, Head Start, a number of others. The Church of the Butte was down there. I could not stay very late, and so when I had to leave, the group was still a fairly light attendance. I'm thinking they picked up a little bit later when it cooled off. But I was really kind of impressed to see the number of organizations we have out there that provide services of different kinds to our residents. And it's just encouraging to see that. And I don't know, as usual, the issue with things like this is getting the word out, and that's a challenge in this community. That's a challenge no matter what you're trying to do. I think there were a lot of people that would have benefited doing that. I had